Hey folks, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. Today I have Sterling Cooley on the show. Sterling is a pioneering figure in the field of ultrasound neuromodulation, specializing in non-invasive vagus nerve stimulation to enhance human health and consciousness. And as a biotech innovator, he has developed multi-therapeutic approaches aimed at advancing human development and well-being. And I brought Sterling on the show today to talk about, in particular, Xenon, which is a really interesting gas that we'll get into more details around. But before we do that, I just want to welcome you to the show, Sterling. So thanks for joining us for the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paul. Great to see you again.
So we met almost 6 years ago to the day. A mutual friend of ours, Dina Burkitbayeva, who is quite a prominent investor and now entrepreneur in the psychedelic space, hosted sort of like an informal roundtable dinner. Federico Menapace was also there, who's now the COO of MAPS, and several other folks. And so I got to have like an interesting look into your mind in that connection. And then since that point in time, we followed each other on Twitter, now X. And recently you'd been posting a lot about Xenon. And I wanted to bring you on the show to unpack that a little bit more, because Xenon is not, a well-known psychedelic. Folks may know of it as a gas generally, but in terms of a psychedelic approach, it's not as well known. So I'd love if you could just help create a little bit of context for our audience and our listeners, about like generally what is Xenon.
So Xenon is a very interesting and it's very expensive anesthetic, where it's really just a noble gas. So it's all around us all the time. I think somebody ran some numbers. So if you want some free Xenon, listen closely, just do a lot of breathing, because 1 out of 100,000 breaths, you'll get one isotope of Xenon, and it might cause some, maybe a stray cool thought, right? So it's out there, but people have been, refining Xenon. And recently, I'd say probably in the last maybe 10 years, people have been noticing that when they take Xenon, when they inhale it as a gas, usually in those videos, they compare like hexafluorane, which makes your voice really low, versus helium versus Xenon. They always on Xenon go like, oh my God, what the hell is going on? So there's an effect. There's a biological, semi-dissociative, psychedelic-esque effect from even a very tiny amount of Xenon. So it's very potent. And recently, there's been a lot of interest in that, because some of the work that, I would say Dr. Stuart Hamroff, who for Orch OR theory with Roger Penrose on microtubules and consciousness, they did a how would I say, a molecular simulation of the binding spots of different anesthetics to see, is the reason that people go unconscious under anesthetics, is it blocking synaptic activity, or could it be working somewhere deeper in microtubules? And the evidence does seem to point pretty conclusively that most anesthetics that make you go unconscious or modulate your consciousness up to the point of unconsciousness, but that all those effects are really due to microtubule interactions. So Xenon's really interesting because it's unlike many psychedelic drugs. It's unlike many anesthetics in that it's just a single isotope. It's just the pure thing. It's just Xenon. So it shouldn't work. It's technically an inert gas, but it has these huge quantum like pi orbitals that shoot out of both poles. And those can kind of like wedge themselves close enough into a microtubule that they think it's literally interfering with your standard waves of consciousness per moment. And so, yeah, I mean, I definitely want to talk to you about some of the really wild effects that people have been reporting from Xenon all over the internet, in clinics and also in like recreational private use. So
before we dive into that, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how did you become interested in Xenon? When did it first come on your radar, and why are we doing a podcast about Xenon and in the first place?
So, long story short, about 3 years ago, I unfortunately became, I guess maybe it was COVID or something like that, but I became very ill, and I got something called ulcerative colitis, which is like in the like the category of Crohn's disease, where your digestive tract is just like really inflamed and you feel just pain all the time, and you just like basically your only options for pain relief when it's a 10 out of 10 are a couple things. So take opioids like tramadol or Dilaudid or morphine, or never touch fentanyl, but something like a heavy duty like a heavy duty opioid, something that can relieve pain. And or drive yourself to the emergency room and get an injection of pure opioids. And so those were my only two options for this kind of pain. Because I
Wow.
hope nobody here ever gets ulcerative colitis. It is horrible, and it
Mm.
developed in like 2021. I actually think it was probably related to I tried the carnivore diet pretty intensely, and I was eating red meat all the time. I was losing weight, but then I lost 50 pounds suddenly because this ulcerative colitis thing. So anyway, I looked like an Auschwitz victim after being released from the hospital for 3 weeks, skin and bones. Not, I'm a lot better now, but I was just in so much pain, and I had to research like what else could I do, because I know taking opioids is going to make me heavily addicted to this, and so I read that people with ulcerative colitis oftentimes will use something like nitrous oxide to help them. And so I was like, I'm desperate. Like, this is horrific pain. You know what I'm saying? And it's just
Mm.
coming from your stomach, from your pelvic region. And it's just like, I can't deal with this anymore. So I did go out and get one of those, nitrous oxide bottles, and I tried it, just, and it did, it like instantly removed the pain. That was what I was using it for, not at parties or anything like that. Had no idea what the psychedelic effects could have been. I learned quickly that it can be really insane. And I remember the first time, like in that first week where I was doing it, I'd be like, wait until the pain's really bad and then do a balloon, and the pain's gone. And so
Mm.
but I was laying down on my, like a cot couch kind of thing on a pillow, doing a balloon and just watching a YouTube video. And then in my mind's eye, after inhaling, like re-inhaling this, I saw an image, like a video feed of myself, but from 6 feet above my head, above my body, looking down at myself. And my body was kind of this blue color, like a hologram, but it was a repeating image. So it was myself here with a copy of it, with a lighter copy, just going on to infinity. And I looked around the room, I'm like, how am I seeing this? And the only place in my room where there was actually a pinhole of light was from a curtain looking at the sky. And so I kind of freaked out. I was like, what in the F is going on? This is crazy. Nobody warned me about this. And so I quickly realized that this is doing something different. And I referred back to Stuart Hameroff and his work, because he's an anesthesiologist. And I was
Mm.
like, well, I know they don't use nitrous oxide anymore in hospitals because it's so flammable and it can explode a room. They had problems with that in the 80s, and they're like, okay, we can't use this anymore. Like, we don't want the floor blowing up. So they ixnayed it. But I pulled up some of his talks, and he had talked about ketamine, nitrous oxide, and xenon,
Hmm.
and talking about the pharmacology of where they're actually working. And it started to kind of click in my head that because of what he says, like, he's an anesthesiologist, he's a 50-year veteran in the operating room. So, and he studies this, he works with great, really intelligent physicists. They can model all this stuff. They can look at like van der Waals forces, dipole oscillations in microtubules. All this kind of stuff can be modeled. And they're like, yeah, ketamine, nitrous oxide, and xenon all act in those same channels all around the microtubules. And if you understand the microtubule kind of lore about what it's kind of doing, it's in a sense accessing this like non-local aspect of consciousness.
Hmm.
There's a domain of consciousness that kind of spreads out. It smears over time and space, and that's quantum world, right? You're talking about quantum mechanics at this point in time, and some really weird things can happen. And so I was like, this is way too weird. And so yeah, I started researching like that stuff, and the documentary about on Vice TV came up from Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. he did a full episode on Xenon, and he
Mm.
went to Eastern Europe and found a clinic that will actually give you Xenon, pure Xenon in these big bottles, and they do it through a mask, and it's very professional. They mix it with oxygen too because you don't want to like asphyxiate. Um, and the reports that they were saying were very similar to what I had experienced with this, and I was like, this is really fascinating. So yeah, probably for the last like year, I've been just really trying to understand, picking up as much of this the research on this, and kind of I'm using my X platform in a way to bring awareness to Xenon as a potential therapeutic agent, because I think, again, I think there are people out there who suffer from extreme chronic pain, and part of the pain that came from the ulcerative colitis also caused a lot of PTSD, and
Mm.
and that resolved once I started kind of relieving the pain, but also then having these very introspective, disassociative psychedelic experiences. Also, one of the times I was in the hospital, they, instead of giving me opioids, they gave me ketamine as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
So they gave me a slow drip of ketamine. I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I've always wanted to try that, drip ketamine thing. Because I'm kind of a psychonaut. I'm from Berkeley, so yeah, of course. And it was very interesting, and it had similar disassociation effects. But I
Mm.
didn't see, it wasn't enough to have what I hear on YouTube videos where people are like, oh, I saw this beautiful purple woman from intergalactic space who fell in love with me. And I didn't see anything like that. But I'd say I saw more stuff like that on the gaseous anesthetics rather than on ketamine. But so yeah, since that time, and really realizing that opioids are terrible and
Mm.
horrific and cause tons of problems, tons of side effects, it made me start to feel like, I don't know, I'm losing a part of myself from that. So I was just
Mm.
like, all right, I just need to get awareness out there that there's something else for people who are in these situations, PTSD or in extreme pain, and they need it to go away. I mean, it's just compassionate to say, hey, there's something, because like the problem with nitrous oxide is that too much usage can really mess up your neurology. Like it
Right.
can demyelinate your neurons, it can cause paralysis, psychosis. There's a lot of things. Now, Xenon isn't free from all of those things, but it's free from 90% of
Hmm.
those side effects,
Mm.
because Xenon doesn't stick around. It doesn't break down. It's in. It has its effect probably on microtubules, and then you blow it out of your system. It's gone in minutes. So
So the microtubules thing is interesting, and I want to spend a little bit of time on that
mm,
because a lot of the neuroscience around psychedelic research, as you're very familiar with, psychedelics are these serotonergic agonists. They work in the 5-HT2A receptor, right? They help to interrupt the default mode network. They create greater connectivity between both hemispheres of the brain, et cetera, et cetera. And microtubules are a sort of a new thing for me, and I'm sure for many of our listeners. So I'd love if you could bring us a little bit deeper into like the context around what are microtubules and how do they relate to some of these altered states of consciousness that, for example, Xenon is helping to facilitate.
yeah, I mean, yeah, asking me like what is a microtubule, I've given like basically lectures about this subject. So um, I've gotten better at kind of condensing what the core components are that people will remember and take with them. But basically, so I drew behind me, this is a neuron right here.
Mhm.
And green is the cytoskeleton, right? So that's what gives form and shape and movement to a neuron that allows it to have the axons and the dendrites and connect to other neurons. And if it weren't for the microtubules, they would just be a sphere that just sits there. So microtubules we know are important for also cellular division, movement, detection. In single cell organisms, microtubules are still there. So there's microtubules in like every part of life that you're going to see, there's a microtubule in it, right? Um, and so I don't even know where it started, but I mean, basically, gosh, the history of studying microtubules is vast and long, and there's a lot to say. But at its core, if you look at like the Orch OR theory, which stands for orchestrated objective reduction, which is a collaborative theory between Roger Penrose, Nobel Prize winning physicist, and Dr. Stuart Hameroff, who's the anesthesiologist. They both published books right about the same time in the 80s, late 80s. Hameroff about using microtubules as sort of nanomachines because of their diverse functionality of what they can do. They clearly have some processing ability. So they have a mind to a degree. They're processing information. They can extend as far as they need to. They can shorten. They can totally depolymerize, and means fall apart into their component tubulin. And then they can get a command signal and then go shh and create this long tube form out of the components. So they're like IKEA building blocks, and they can just stack to each other in these 13 columns as long as they need. And so they're doing some really interesting things. And there's also the centrosome, which is this important part of the cell, which is just more microtubules stacked even further together. And if you were looking in the cell, looking for like, where's the core computer of a cell? You'd be like, it's definitely the microtubule organizing center, or the centrosome, the centriole. And so there's something with these microtubules that's able to, with something like maybe quantum effects, able to access, and this is where Penrose even talks about, I wish I would have drawn it here, but it's this kind of this three world model. It's like the Platonic model, right? Where you have like Platonic space in one sphere manifesting to the physical world, because the physical world follows pretty rigid rules, right? Like carbon and quarks and protons and neutrinos, they all follow rules. Here on the sun, in outer space, they follow the same rules. So what's the rule set that they're following? And so we haven't really figured it out. String theory hasn't really solved that at all. I think string theory is probably not a real thing, but I mean, it's a field of study, but I don't think it's got it. But there's probably, and this is reflected in like Michael Levin, who does bioelectric work. Even he thinks that these cells are accessing the Platonic space for things like symmetry, mathematics, the beauty, like this. If you look at nature, you're like, okay, plants have this beautiful symmetry, this mathematical form. How are they calculating it? It's not stored in their DNA. There's all kinds of things that they're accessing. So there's probably a Platonic space which holds all the rules. Then there's the material world. But then in materials, how do you get a mind from that? So then you say there's a third mental sphere. And so from physical determined matter, right, you get something called the mind, right? This awareness of this, which is a crazy thing that exists. How can carbon, if you stack enough carbon together, how do you eventually get to a human mind that can create Google and AI and all this kind of stuff, or all the stuff that we've created? So what we think is that, who knows the order of operations here, but basically physical matter has some places where consciousness happens, and consciousness wants to recreate itself. It wants to build more mechanisms for more mental states, because more mental states gives you more survivability, but also the access to like pleasurable experiences. Platonic values are things like, again, beauty, symmetry, aesthetics, mathematics definitely is there. And then, and also ethics, morality. Like what's the difference between good and bad, right and wrong? And that could be in a Platonic space. And so the more that we develop these mental faculties, we see this creation of more beauty and symmetry. And of course, mental isn't always connected to that. So we can do some not so nice things, but there is some aspect of it. Like we've noticed throughout all of human history that there seems to be some core connection to this like feeling of the qualia of good and bad, and what's nice and what isn't nice. So there's this three-way model, and we think that microtubules are probably like nature's best attempt that we know of. In all of the solar system that we've studied so far, the most developed form of trying to really constantly access that space so that humans can have this kind of source connection, this sort of conscious awareness, this self-referential awareness which is what I think I saw when I had that nitrous oxide experience, was me seeing myself in a platonic form way, and it was like kind of reiterating through the three world model in a rapid loop that I could see. Some people, I think, see it more often, and some people are completely blind to it. So they hear this and they go, "This sounds fucking crazy. This is nuts." And I totally would have been on their side prior to this. I never would have entertained a thought like that had I never seen these things. So, so yeah, microtubules are like our best, I don't know, tool that nature gave us or that we developed, because at the core of it, if you really think down to the tiny, I am a microtubule system. Like,
Right.
you're a microtubule system. Everybody watching this, unless you're an AI, I don't know why you would watch this. What's the point of this? An AI machine cannot do Xenon, so good luck. But I hopefully you get microtubules someday, and you can experience what we're actually talking about. But so yeah, microtubules are pretty instrumental in, I think, this kind of re like this reverberation loop between our consciousness, our mental state, accessing through mathematics, the platonic realm. Like, we can literally do math that like accesses the mind. Somebody would call it the mind of God or whatever, but I don't say that. It's just platonic latent space creates the physical, and then creates more mental state. So they're really important. And I think these drugs, even the drugs you mentioned, like serotonin reuptake inhibitors and 5-HT agonists, these kinds of things, there's definitely, I pulled up some research that shows that like things like cocaine, heroin, LSD, psilocybin, DMT, they all are small enough to get close to these microtubules as well, and exert similar types of like constructive and destructive forces on our normal state of consciousness. So there's also a relevance across most psychedelics because of their phenyl rings. You know, the carbon rings that they have there.
Mm-hmm.
That those are very quantum fluctuation channels. And if you get them close enough to another one in our microtubules, we have tryptophan, phenylalanine rings in our microtubules, and they can just exert a force. And so that's probably why you microdose the exact same chemist's form of LSD, and you're like, this experience is very similar from one day to the next. Versus if you get a different dose or a different chemist and it's a little more adulterated, you're like, okay, this is definitely different. That's not all just because it's not a serotonin thing. There's too much there, I think. People can disagree with me, but I think there's too much there in the mental experience to say, oh, it's just this bit going on and off this many times per second. It's like there's clearly more at play than just synaptic activity, in my opinion. So
Okay, so we'll
yeah.
come back to base camp. Microtubules, my sense is they allow us to access, what I'm hearing is maybe a non-local state of consciousness that allows us to tap into these platonic ideals, if you will, of beauty, symmetry, aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that then you're sort of, so let's say, adamant or vocal about what Xenon in particular can do for these microtubules? What is it specifically about Xenon as a drug or a gas that you think has a direct tie-in to these microtubules? And maybe the flip side of that is like, why not DMT, or why not LSD, or like, why aren't we having these active conversations about some of the more classic psychedelics as they relate to microtubules?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think for me, the reason that I am so vocal about Xenon in particular is because at the core of life is this desire to experience pleasure that's present everywhere, right? So, you can tell 20, 30-year-old, don't do drugs, don't do it. It's just bad, right? And I was told that. I took the DARE program, right? I had the cops in my, what is it, like my elementary school telling me, don't do drugs. I still did drugs. I'm from Oregon. I smoked pot, whatever. So I think from my perspective, it's more of, to a mixed extent, harm reduction versus like, okay, look, yeah, you could make the argument that, yeah, ketamine is cheaper, It lasts a lot longer. It's cheaper compared to Xenon, right? And it can have some pretty cool effects. There are also side effects. There's also adulteration. We know about that a lot, especially with things like cocaine. And so, like, it touched me very personally around the same time when I was introduced to this, of a student I had. I worked at Stanford for a summer in a summer camp called like ID Tech years ago. Great program for kids to learn about how to do computers and robotics and engineering and all kinds of stuff. And I was like in college at the time. We teach high schoolers how to do that stuff. And I had a great kid one of those summers, and I heard literally around that same time that in Berkeley he was at a party. He thought he was doing cocaine, and it turned out to be fentanyl laced, and he's dead.
Oh no.
Yeah. So it was one of my actual students. And, it's just these white powders, right? I've been in the Bay Area. I know how it goes. There's a powder everywhere, and you just don't know, right? And that was, again, the tragedy is horrific, but it was Susan Wojcicki's child too. Who's the CEO, was the CEO of YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it hurt her really hard. She got cancer and died like 8 months later, 10 months later. So I was just like, this is so fucked up. Like, and I see this all the time. Like, it's on the news all the time. So for me, as crazy as it might sound, it really for me is just, it's a harm reduction strategy. And it's also kind of it's a potential wake up call for people to realize that, like, yes, Xenon is expensive, but I can assure you that you're not going to get fentanyl in your Xenon. It comes in these very pure, very highly refined, very filtered out forms. It'll give you your kick. If you're looking for that kick, it'll give it to you and more. Because I think that the effects of Xenon are like ketamine, but also a little bit of DMT. So there's a heavily psychedelic aspect of it, and then there's a heavy dissociative aspect of it too. Any drug can kill you. I get it. I know the people out there going, but. Yeah, of course. Anything can kill you. If you're doing any of this stuff, there's always risk for harm. I think with the biggest risk with Xenon, and it's much less than with nitrous oxide, is that you get sick during it. It's way more potent, way more a factor in nitrous oxide, but you'll vomit, and if you're unconscious, you'll aspirate it and you'll choke and you'll die. So that is a risk.
So it's good to have a friend.
Good to have a friend. Yeah, I definitely would recommend having a friend over. So yes, there are risks, but there are, I think, also risks with powdered forms of, ketamine as well. So that's kind of why I harp on it. And I just think it's kind of cool because also I in a way publicly represent sort of the Penrose Hammeroff model of consciousness. And for me, I think it's important. I'm not married to the idea. If another idea came along and was like, no, this is factually, scientifically more robust, and it really does explain consciousness way better. And if it turns out that our consciousness is just happening in our synaptic activity and we can prove it, then I'll be like, okay, great. That was a cool opportunity for me to learn about microtubules. I'll still be interested in microtubules still after that. But the fact of the matter is that Xenon shouldn't work according to the models of how psychedelics work. It's an inert gas. It's too small to have an effect across these NMDA receptors, which is where the literature, for the most part, claims that it has to be working, but it just can't. You can model that. You could go, this thing is too small. It's like less than 5 angstroms in a synapse. Like a synaptic gap is going to be 100 orders of magnitude larger. Shouldn't work. But Xenon does work, and we know it can get to microtubules and cause some really questionable effects that are like, okay, this doesn't seem to be what I've been told. So I hope that people who are, and then there's another guy, Andres Gomez Emilson, great guy, love him, met him, awesome mind. Has he been on the podcast?
I haven't. I need to get him on the podcast. He is a wild dude.
He's a great dude. He's a wild dude. So he does a lot of work with like DMT, and so
I think 5-MeO in particular, right?
5-MeO, yeah. very interesting, all the kinds of stuff you see on it. And so, yeah, I also speak to those people with this, is that try Xenon. Like, are you certain that, because if you do one drug and you create a kind of a world narrative about it, right? Oh, what you're really seeing are these six-dimensional entities, or it's just geometry, or there's all kinds of conclusions that are reached from doing that. And I don't know, maybe try it to challenge your conceptions about what you think these things are doing, because you might find that there's stuff that you might not fit in that model. And if you do find something that's really interesting, then tell people about it. This is human knowledge. This is like for the betterment of all mankind, of our conscious experience. Help us, right? So yeah, through my X activities, I've definitely gotten a lot of people to actually go out and purchase Xenon and do it and report back to me. Okay, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Is this real? And like, yeah, dude, this is fucking crazy. So so yeah, I have a lot of kind of reports from people that have taken the action from my Twitter activities. It's not for nothing. That's for sure.
Well,
So yeah.
let's talk a little bit about that. So just so the listeners at home know, because we talked about this before the podcast, Xenon is not a scheduled drug or substance. It's accessible. It's available. As Sterling has mentioned, it is a
Mhm.
little expensive and pricey, but if you are a psychonaut, if you're interested in exploring this, I'll provide a link in the show notes about where you might be able to get a very high quality source of
Mhm.
Xenon. But I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about like what are some of these wild stories, because we've talked about Xenon, we've talked about microtubules, we've talked about these non-local states of consciousness.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, bring us a little bit more into like what are some of the wild things that people are experiencing when they're experimenting with Xenon.
So typically at low doses, it's just going to be like the most euphoric thing you've ever felt. Better than any drug you've ever tried, probably. Better than anything. Better than sex, maybe. I mean, it's deep in there. Um, but then where it gets really interesting are the psychedelic or visions. It's more, I would say it's not so much like psychedelic if you've taken mushrooms, where like, okay, the walls are groovy and melting and that kind of stuff, which is cool. But these are like internal mental visions.
Hmm.
And if like, definitely I encourage people to go watch that documentary from Hamilton Morris. It provides you this, it's like it provides you with this access point to a space of processing of consciousness that is like really, it's really weird. It seems like you're accessing, like if I were to make a guess as to what the platonic space contained, this would be like you being able to see it and experience it with your, like while you're conscious and doing it.
Mm.
And so some of the things that like from that documentary are things like visions of butterflies, these just, it's like a waking dream state in a sense. So it's like DMT in that way, but it's just different. And it seems to be, I mean, I know DMT can have very personal experiences, but it's like the Xenon is so customizable to you. I know that happens in a lot of psychedelics, but it's like what it, I would equate it to is, and this is where I'm going to go off into another, not a long tangent, but just this idea that, if quantum mechanics is really telling us what we think it is, there could be some sort of template of us. Like some would call it the soul. I'm not saying that the soul is like in our body and floats around per se. I think there's consciousnesses in our body, but in the Platonic realm, there's probably a miniaturized version of you that is kind of directing you from that space too,
Might we call
in a
that like
sense.
in New Age lingo? Is that like the higher self
Yeah,
in a
like the high,
way?
yeah, like the
Kind of
the
okay.
higher self, or the avatar kind of
Mm.
idea. So it's
Hmm.
an avatar of me that's speaking through my, again, because you have these paradoxes of, okay, well, we know it's just carbon and water and oxygen. How does that create a person with free will, right? Do I have free will or do I not? And the only way you can get to free will is if there's again, some aspect of your mind using even reverse time, like information when it kind of collapses to one thing or the other, if you believe in that idea of objective collapse of the waveform kind of thing. There can only be two parallel realities for so long. One has to make a decision and it collapses. It could be that that avatar in my mind is influencing that kind of decision making process in real time. And that's where you would find your free will, right?
Mm,
So what it seems like, just a meta analysis, is that doing the Xenon gets you up close and personal with that avatar
mm,
and what sort of like its process and its state of mind and what it sees and like what it sees for you. And the aspect of time just goes out the window. Like, of
mm,
course, with many psychedelics that happens, but this one, I mean, there's aspects of people seeing through like infinity tunnels, these
mm,
kinds of things. Um, I know general the weirder stuff is that I know of are people seeing out of other people's eyes, which is a
mm,
really notable one on these kinds of anesthetics. And like literally just being transported into somebody else's mind for a moment of time, maybe 2 minutes, and just being in their body and experiencing what they are experiencing in real time as if you're seeing out of their own head.
wow.
And there's some, I mean, it's crazy. It sounds like people are like, oh, that's so hypothetical. But there was a study that I had to do a live workshop immediately last week because I was like, this is an emergency. There was a study done by Anirban Bandyapade in India. And he was actually using a spectrum analyzer, which is like $1,000, sometimes $20,000 measurement device that you usually use for radios. Like, is this radio emitting the right amount of waves so it can communicate with another radio? That's what a spectrum analyzer is for
Hmm.
typically. But he found that if you place it up to your head, you can see those same signatures of microtubules. And he measured 60 people under propofol anesthesia in the hospital, and he found that the meninges, which generally would kind of contain your electrical activity, that's the biggest impediment for EEG being recorded at the scan, is the meninges. So usually, like, you cut into the head and you put a Neuralink in there, you get like direct access. He found that under anesthetics, they even tested nitrous oxide. They didn't test Xenon. I want them to, but they tested propofol, ketamine, nitrous oxide, a whole class of drugs, and they found that it decreases the meninges' ability to contain those emanations in that megahertz range, and that you would see people's minds basically like leaking out of their head in vast amounts, and then they would go unconscious. But there are plenty of reports in hospitals of people under general anesthesia during a surgery, like especially life or death emergency kind of stuff, where they're like, yeah, I was floating above my body. I was looking at myself while you were doing the surgery. Here's what you talked about. This is what you said. This is what you said. They could see everything. They could remember it. They could bring it back.
Wow.
So yeah, so that's published work now, and nobody had thought to do that, right? So
Mm,
now we're in a weird time in history right now. We have access to technology that's just getting to be able to measure what people for a lot of time, a lot, have been telling us is happening. And I like to say, like, people from olden times, even 30 years ago or 100 years ago or 7,000 years ago or whatever, talking about weird religious, spiritual experiences, I don't think that they were trying to troll us. I just don't think that. I don't think they
mm.
were carving stuff on the wall about weird alien looking things and whatever, just to be like, these suckers are totally going to fall for this. I just don't think that's what's going on. Like, it's not like we're not on the episode of Pranked called, like, so anyway, so yeah, some of the reports are just, I would say it's very personal, very personal. It's like you see yourself in the context of your whole life across time. People, this is, I think that joke about You know the joke about getting one-shotted by DMT or ayahuasca
Ayahuasca, yeah, sure.
by a six-dimensional Mesoamerican demon who rearranges your brain and you quit your email job to become a circus stripper or whatever. So
which is
yes,
which is one of the best tweets in the history of Twitter.
I
I do have
know
to admit there's so much
it
riches
was
there.
pretty great, pretty
Yeah,
spot on.
yeah,
So
yeah.
um, so yeah, I mean, but they are very personal experiences, and you get to see like, do I want to live my life doing an email support job for the rest of my life? And maybe your avatar is saying like look, you've been born into this body, you are so incredible, and you've forgotten, you have amnesia. Like the point of being born has removed you from direct communication with that, and so I think that things like Xenon, one time in your life, like don't make it a habit. I mean, gosh, I mean, especially it'll destroy your bank account. Um, which, by the way, like just for people who are like in the back, like how much is this? You keep on saying it's expensive. So if you buy it in 2 liters at a time, it's about $200 for 2 liters. That's about a 30-minute session, but the experience will last for a while.
It's
So
probably
it's
like an
not,
integration phase, like after
yeah,
you
you're
take
like, what
LSD
the
or
fuck? Yeah,
ayahuasca,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
But it has
yeah,
lasting effects. You're just like, whoa. And then I think it also does something to like, I would guess your dopamine receptors, because you definitely notice people are like way less in this like addictive ADHD zone.
hmm.
They value things way differently. And it's not like, nobody has been like, oh my God, I was in the psychiatric ward after Xenon and I went crazy. I've never seen that. I've never heard that. I've looked all over. And that would be a big precondition for me saying, yeah, I'm never going to talk about this, because I know that just having this podcast, uh, 0.01% of people watching this will actually probably go through with this. So
Right.
of course I don't want to
Including
ever recommend
myself.
some,
I'm
yeah,
even
right.
having ideas like we could just do like Xenon retreats in the Bay, just get people a bunch of Xenon and be in a
Yeah.
group and see like what do our avatars say and shit like that.
I know quite a few in the Bay Area because that's some of my biggest audience on Twitter that are doing or planning on that kind of stuff or working towards it.
Yeah.
Um, One other cool thing about Xenon is it doesn't break down in the body. So you inhale it and you exhale it. Now it's the pure Xenon that you inhaled in the first place mixed with carbon dioxide, a little bit of
Hmm.
oxygen, a little bit of water. But you can literally recycle it through a cryo freeze process and rebottle it and then reuse it. And you
Mm.
can do that infinitely many times. So
Hmm.
yeah. So technically, if you're in a clinic, so they do this more in Eastern Russia, in Eastern Europe up to Russia.
Hmm.
Russia, actually, I'm not pro Russia or anything like that, but so don't get me wrong here, but they have a lot of Xenon clinics there.
Hmm.
It's way more popular than ketamine. It's very well used. And they will actually have you exhale into a container that has these microbeads that capture just xenon and filter out everything. Then they put it into a heat pressurized chamber and it expels the xenon. They suck it back up with a compressor and then they will rebottle it. And they charge like $20 to recycle like a whole session worth of xenon. So really, if you have the right ecosystem that you've built, and you can go on eBay and buy some of these xenon extractor systems for like $5,000. Yes, they're used; they're not brand new. If you go to Chinese Alibaba, they have like $20,000 industrial sized xenon recompressors that you could literally do. Um, so I thought it would be a great idea to, because this is a billionaire's drug. Let's be honest. Like it's not for if you're like kind of struggling. Like I wouldn't recommend getting into anything like that. But yeah, if you've got the cash for it and you don't even need to recycle it, there are tanks that you can buy of pure 99.9999% pure just xenon with nothing else, and those are 1,000-liter bottles. They're highly compressed. They're made out of pure steel, reinforced steel. And that actually comes down to $25 per liter. And you need
Wow.
you need 1.5 liters for a pretty good effect. 2 liters is like, okay, you're rocking and rolling. And so that's $50 for like potentially a life-changing experience if you can buy in bulk, obviously. But that canister is $25,000, and
Mm.
they are on eBay right now. You can buy them from the US. It's cheaper in China too, but you have to pay all kinds of tariffs and customs. So
At this point in time, yeah.
yeah, but I have had people from outside of the US. So if you're outside of the US, listen, they don't charge as much tariffs and customs and stuff in Turkey
Mhm.
and that kind of place. So a lot of people will buy like 10-liter bottles or 25-liter bottles for a lot cheaper outside of the US. So there's a premium here. But I was, an idea I had was like, okay, get one of those big, those big domes, those big retreat domes that
Like the
they put up.
geodesic domes,
The
yeah.
geodesic dome, they have them in
Yeah.
Burning Man, all that kind of stuff. Like you could basically have a party in there. You could fill it up with some mixture of pure oxygen and xenon and just go about your experience and be like, wow, this is like a interesting conversation we're having here, and be still in the level of like conscious but definitely feeling it. It'd be
Huh.
like, yeah, I don't know, I never did cuddle puddles or anything like that in the bear. I just thought it was too weird. But
But xenon geodesic dome tanks, you'd be like, sign me up
yeah,
for that. Yeah,
yeah, for
immediately.
sure.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
charge like $50,000 for that, probably for a day.
I'm
That'd
just
be a
thinking
good
it'd be
cost.
fun to like buy one of those massive steel reinforced tanks, like we host parties every now and then and just sort of have like a
Mhm.
secret back room and like right next to the shift wave, which is this cool like vibrational sound chair. You have a xenon
Totally.
thing, and you just put someone in a sound chair and load them up with xenon and like see what transpires from
Yeah.
there.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. So, people, dude. I mean, look, bucket list. You're like, I get to do xenon. Who the fuck gets to do that, right?
Right.
That's cool. Like, again, people will be like, oh, I went to Peru and I did the combo, and it's like, well, I did xenon, dude. So what's that about? But so yeah, I don't know. There's lots of options, but yeah, it's pretty cool stuff.
So
It's
if,
pretty
if
fun.
folks want to learn more about, Xenon, we don't have a guide on third wave, surprisingly,
Hmm.
about Xenon. Maybe we need to write that from this episode because I'm pretty fascinated. But if folks they want to learn more, maybe this is something like they want to look into. Where do you
Mhm.
point folks from, Twitter or from podcast conversations?
So my work is mainly in ultrasound, actually, and I hope that someday, to the dismay of people who refine xenon and think they're going to sell it to the market, I think that actually something like ultrasound can, if we're not there yet. It's very different. Like ultrasound effects can make you feel good, but they're like down here. Xenon's like way up here. So you've
Mm-hmm.
got that's my target, is eventually to create an ultrasound system that can
Yeah.
go here or further and have like, really psychedelic experiences just with digital sound stuff, modulation.
Mm-hmm.
But so I give away all kinds of ultrasound stuff for free. I tell people like, here's how you use it. I do that on Twitter all the time. You see me do that. I don't really care. It's totally fine. But for the Xenon stuff, that's kind of like my little carrot that I dangle. I do have what's called a school group, SKOOL.com. And I
Oh,
have
cool.
one group called Ultra, and that's called Ultra Skool. So you'll see that. We charge like $7 a month. You can refer people, get an affiliate commission, whatever. I don't really care, but I'll give you one if you want. If people want to sign up through you and you get paid, that's fine. But we do have a full guide on there on
Hmm.
Xenon. We even have links to the dentist setup that they use in the clinics in Europe.
Hmm.
So you can purchase these for brand new, not used, with digital mixtures, and they have a container for oxygen and for typically for nitrous oxide in those cases. But you can literally put a xenon bottle of the same size, and it requires a slightly different hookup. It's called the CGA 580. That's not a nitrous. They don't produce xenon so you can do it recreationally. So they produce it for industrial gas testing and chemistry and all kinds of stuff, or lighting. And so the connectors are different, but we've done the research and the testing to get that whole system correct. And that took a lot of research to be like, okay, does this adapter fit this? And is there gas? So that's all there. There's a whole, literally, if you log in, it's a classroom just called Xenon. It's a big
Which is
picture, and it says
Xenon.
yes,
Xenon, just so folks know.
and it just says if you know, you know. And then it's got stuff on like microtubules and ultrasound and all kinds of stuff, so you can read about what we think is happening.
And what's the URL for that, Sterling? Just so folks want to go directly there.
Yeah, it's skool.com/ultra. All lowercase, better, and school with a K.
So skool.com/ultra. Check out Sterling's membership group if you want to go deeper into Xenon. We'll also drop some links in the show notes if you want to go there. Any other place? Do you have a personal website, or, I know you're very active on X, so if folks want to sort of ask you questions or interact at all, like, you can find Sterling on X. Anywhere else you want to point folks?
Not really. No, I think I spend the most of my time on X, and just Sterling Cooley. That's my handle, and I'm not on LinkedIn. I would probably never get very far talking about this on LinkedIn. So, but yeah, X is the place where I feel there's an audience for this, and I feel safe talking about it. So
fantastic. Well, check out Sterling on X, and check out schoolgroup.com.
Or
school.com/ultra for more details. Sterling, thanks for being a wild wizard and joining us on today's Psychedelic Podcast. It was a ton of fun.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks so much for watching. If you want to grow your own medicine from microdosing or high dose experiences, check out our Mushroom Grow Kit. It's the simplest way to get a reliable source of high quality mushrooms, and it includes detailed videos walking you through the entire process. No guessing, just clear instructions for best results. Check out the link in the description below.